Welcome to this second video in this 3-video series on oceans. Today we'll talk about life in the oceans. I'm Aida Awad from Broward College. Today you might see me smile a little bit more because I'm an avid scuba diver, so I'd like to introduce you to 4 nudibranchs here on this slide. They're really interesting creatures. I hope you have an opportunity to meet some of them. The learning targets for this video are to recognize the various physical zones of the ocean, including benthic and pelagic, and the types of organisms that are found in each, to describe the diversity of life on a coral reef, to explain how the health of coral reefs is influenced by adjacent coastal and inland ecosystems, and distinguish among the various types of reefs, such as barrier reefs, fringe, and patch reefs. We'll see some examples of those, but we won't talk about them specifically. So we'll start off in a big picture with the major ocean life zones. And here we can see a diagram that shows us with depth and distance from the shore, the zones. So intertidal zone is the first zone we'll talk about. Then we'll talk about the benthic environment. And then we'll move on to pelagic environment. So we'll talk about the neritic province and the oceanic province. We're going to use a rocky shoreline as an example for this first little bit on intertidal zones. The uppermost part of that is called supratidal, so that's the splash zone. And that's an area where at high tide you might have some splash into a tidal pool, which might contain some tube worms or hermit crabs or anemones. And then the intertidal zone, which is submerged at high tide and may not be submerged at low tide. And in this area, there will be some things like mussels and oysters and some brown algae, maybe some barnacles living. And then the subtidal zone, which is the benthic environment, which is always submerged. And then in this area, you might see sea stars, brittle stars, sea urchins, and spider crabs. Moving on to talk about the benthic environment. The benthic environment is the ocean floor from the intertidal zone to the deep ocean trenches. The sediments there consist primarily of sands and muds, and it has 3 specific zones. The bathyal zone, which is from the continental shelf to the bottom of the continental slope. The abyssal zone, which is the flat area along the bottom of the ocean. And the hadal zone, which is considered the deep ocean. Moving on to talk about coral reefs, so part of the benthic environment. Corals are colonies of animals. They're not plants. Coral polyps produce calcium carbonate exoskeletons that they live in, and an accumulation of those exoskeletons forms a hard coral reef. Soft corals don't produce the exoskeletons, and you can see an example of a soft coral in the picture on the right side. Coral reefs are found in warm, shallow waters in the photic zone. They need light. Corals capture food with their stinging tentacles, many of them feeding at night, which is probably the attraction of night diving to many scuba divers. They are high productivity environments, even in nutrient-poor waters. And coral reefs are the most diverse marine habitat on Earth. They're ecologically important habitats. They protect coastlines from erosion, and they provide components of many medicines. Another benthic environment is the seagrass environment. And you can see pictures of its typical inhabitants here. So manatees graze in a seagrass environment, as do turtles. You'll see many fish there, but I put a picture of this seahorse in there. Seagrass is actually a flowering plant that's adapted to live in seawater. It does require light, so it is found in water that is less than about 33 feet deep. It's temperate, it's subtropical, and tropical waters. It has a high primary productivity, and it's a very ecologically important environment. The roots there help to stabilize the sediments and thus reduce erosion. And seagrass provides food for not only marine organisms, but things like ducks and geese as well. Moving on to the third benthic environment, which is the kelp forest. Kelp is the largest and most complex of the seaweeds. It's a brown algae, and it's typically found in cooler, temperate marine waters. It's abundant in shallow waters along rocky shorelines, such as the shorelines of the western coast of North America. And it is a primary food producer for the kelp forest ecosystem. Typical marine organisms that you'll find living there are tube worms, sponges, sea cucumbers, starfish, some of them called sunflower stars with 23 or 24 legs, clams, crabs, sea otters, and fish. And it supports a very different ecosystem than a coral reef, but a very attractive ecosystem as well. Moving to the pelagic environment. The pelagic environment includes all of the ocean water from the shoreline down to the deepest of the ocean trenches. It's subdivided into life zones based on depth and the degree of light penetration. The neritic province includes depths from 0 to 200 meters or 650 feet. The oceanic province is the deeper zone, and that is deeper than 200 meters. In the neritic environment, we find organisms such as floaters like plankton or swimmers, which are nectons. The euphotic zone, which is the upper level of the neritic zone, goes down to a maximum depth of about 150 meters. In this area, light still penetrates the ocean water and thus supports photosynthesis. Here we find phytoplankton, which are microscopic algae, and they're the basis for many food webs. We also find zooplankton, crustaceans and jellyfish that feed on those phytoplankton. And then we find plankton-eating nectons, things like small herrings in their schools or large whales. We also find carnivorous nectons such as tuna and sharks. In the deeper ocean province, we find cold waters, high pressures, and virtually no light. In this region, we have some of the ocean's strangest creatures. They are adapted to darkness and to a scarceness of food. They drift or swim slowly through those deep ocean waters. Many produce light, and they depend sometimes on marine snow, which you can see in the bottom left picture here, which is organic debris that rains down from up above in the ocean on a 365, 24/7 basis. Here we find filter feeders, scavengers, and even predators. Many large invertebrates live there, such as the giant squid. I think it's time to review our learning targets and head off to the Mastery Check quiz. So we can recognize the various physical zones of the ocean, including benthic and pelagic, and the types of organisms that are found in each. We can describe the diversity of life on a coral reef, explain the health of coral reefs and how it's influenced by adjacent coastal and inland ecosystems, and distinguish between different types of reefs. Go ahead and take your Mastery Check quiz, and I'll see you in class.